Chapter 236, Internal Commission. As Klein's knowledge of mysticism and beyonders deepened, as well as his experiments with some of the powers of the space above the gray fog, he no longer felt anxious when facing justice, the hanged man, and the sun. He became less preoccupied with maintaining an enigmatic and unfathomable image so as to prevent the Tarot Club members from keenly noticing his facade. He now knew that although the deities in this world were powerful and bizarre, they were by no means omnipotent and omniscient. This description was something that only the legendary creator of everything could do, one that only the City of Silver was still worshipping. The deities had their limitations, and the deities could also be put into tough situations. That was something Klein could now confirm. Be it the Book of Storms or the Revelation of Evernight, they more or less touched upon this. Therefore, at the recent tarot gathering, Klein was consciously building character traits, slowly shaping himself into a restricted powerhouse, who, for some reason, couldn't move freely but was almost a deity. This way, even if he occasionally showed that he didn't understand certain things, and occasionally asked for help, it wouldn't arouse the suspicion of the Tarot Club members. Of course, the premise of all this was that, through his previous attempts, and through the power displayed by his blessed Isaac, he had undoubtedly embedded the image of a deity-like existence into the minds of Justice, the Hanged Man, and the Sun.
Hugh, I hope that this building of character traits will succeed. That way, I won't have to worry about not being able to answer their questions in the future. Of course, things that are part of general knowledge still have to be known, and I shouldn't show fear.
Klein tapped the edge of the ancient table and said with a chuckle,
I want to issue a mission.
Mission? Audrey's ears pricked up slightly as her eyes widened. She was astonished, expectant, and perturbed at the same time. She clearly remembered that this was the first time that Mr. Fool had officially issued a mission. Although he had previously made a few requests, they all involved prepaid rewards. It seemed like he had randomly selected missions to conform to the principle of equal exchange. This time he used the word issue. As a telepathist, Audrey was already very good at reading the hidden meanings behind words. At the same time, she keenly realized that although the hanged man appeared to remain unperturbed, he was actually abnormally tense. As for the Sun, he seemed to be muddle-headed, treating this as a very normal thing. With the help of his clown's powers, Klein's tone sounded much more relaxed.
You can choose to accept it or not. Another blessed of mine has arrived in Backland. He wants to finish a matter, but it's not convenient for him to show himself.
Another blessed. The hanged man nodded, seemingly in thought. He wasn't surprised at all. In his eyes, for a powerful godlike existence like Mr. Fool, possessing many blessed was a matter of fact.
I wonder what the sequence number of Mr. Fool's blessed is. Well, I still owe his previous blessed a reward. Even though Mr. Fool's reward was paid by Mr. Hanged Man, and he doesn't really care about money, I did pray for help at that time. Furthermore, Vice Admiral Hurricane was killed by that blessed. His blessed would still need some funds for their activities.
Audrey thought with some guilt. Frankly speaking, 30,000 gold pounds and a large plantation was an enormous amount of wealth to her, but that alone didn't have any significant effect on her life.
It's good having it, but it didn't matter if I didn't. Well, I might feel the pinch a little.
Audrey nodded to herself earnestly. As a teenage girl who wasn't considered an adult yet, ignoring the large plantation, she actually didn't have absolute control over the remaining 30,000 pounds. She could only go with her father's arrangements, purchasing some stocks from Backland Munitions Corporation and invest in a company that was attempting to spin off some of the technology in ironclad warships for commercial ships. The amount she ultimately received and could be used as an allowance was only 5,000 pounds. However, her fixed annuity had increased by at least 2,000 pounds from its original range of 15,000 to 25,000 pounds. Seeing that Justice and the others hadn't spoken, Klein issued the mission.
The task he wants to be completed is the assassination of the Intis Republic ambassador to the Loan Kingdom, Bakerlin Jean Medan.
Assassinate the Intis Republic's ambassador?
Audrey lost her composure as she asked in surprise. This would cause conflict between the two countries and might even be an act of war. As a qualified aristocratic lady, her first thought was about international foreign affairs. As for why Mr. Fool didn't do so himself, she found the answer obvious. Which mighty figure would always be helping their subordinates? After the kingdom suffered defeat at the east coast of Balaam, the king didn't personally set off. At most, the general would be replaced and new troops deployed. Rumor has it that His Majesty wanted to set off for the front line, but was stopped by the nobles and officials. Alger was only mildly surprised by the task. His focus was on another matter.
Mr. Fool is indeed unable to strongly interfere with the real world. My guess is right. I wonder to what extent can he influence us after establishing our connection? Can he easily take one's life away?
Alger, a little pleased with himself, began to let his thoughts wander. Derek blanked out listening to the conversation.
What's the Intis Republic? What's an ambassador? These words sound so strange in Jotun.
Klein swept his gaze around and maintained his casual attitude.
Which one of you is willing to accept this mission? What kind of reward do you want?
I can't convince myself to kill an innocent man for no reason. And it could very well lead to a disaster caused by war.
Audrey, who wanted to raise her hand, hesitated. Just then, the hanged man chuckled and said,
I've heard that this Ambassador Bakerland is also the intelligence chief of the Intis Republic in the kingdom. He secretly supports bloodshed, planned a number of incidents that destroyed the relationship between the nobility and the rich, and spread rumors to incite the public into standing against the government.
He seemed to notice the hesitation in Justice, so he described the dark side of Bakerland in detail. Then he added,
I'm not sure if the ambassador is a beyonder, but there are many clues that suggest he may very well be. He has quite a number of beyonders around him, beyonders that come under the Intis intelligence web. And this department is influenced by the original royal family in Intis, the Sauron family. They're in control of the early sequences of the Hunter pathway. Moreover, the possibility of a war between the two countries depends only on whether or not the upper echelons of both sides want to fight. It has nothing to do with the life or death of a diplomat.
After the assassination of Emperor Roselle, Intis suffered several great shocks, but ultimately managed to maintain a stable republican system. Because the Sauron family suffered a brutal blow during Roselle's reign, their strength fell tremendously in all aspects. All they could do was accept the reality and change their goal to fighting for a seat in Parliament and secretly influence the country's intelligence department and parts of the army. After listening to the information provided by the hanged man, the hesitation in Audrey's heart disappeared. She gracefully nodded and said,
For the past few years, the Fasak Empire has expanded rapidly, having defeated the kingdom and the Intis Republic on the Balaam East Coast and the Highlands. As long as we push the blame to them, the higher-ups and the citizens of the Intis Empire, it will be something acceptable and believable.
Audrey didn't know much about politics, but with her father being a member of Parliament in the House of Lords, she still knew certain things. Be it the shirking of responsibility or shifting the focus onto the kingdom's internal problems, the unpopular northern barbarians were the popular and easiest targets for the nobles and ministers. Whether they did it or not didn't matter. Of course, more than 100 years ago, this role was played by Intis and Roselle. After pondering for a few seconds, Audrey looked at the seat of honor, feeling a little perturbed and a little guilty.
Mr. Fool, I can attempt to complete this mission, but I cannot guarantee its success.
On the one hand, she was going to find her father and confirm that Ambassador Bakerland was really the head of the Intis intelligence service. On the other hand, she wasn't going to do it herself either. As a spectator or a telepathist, neither one of them was good at combat, and all she could do was gather as much information about Ambassador Bakerland from high society as she could and delegate the mission.
Well, I could get Zio and Fours to ask Mr. A to do it. Or find the hosts of the other Beyonder circles. I cannot be exposed. Things have to be kept secret, and there might be Intis intelligence agents lurking in those circles. I don't know how much money I'll have to pay, but £5,000 might not be enough.
Audrey was already beginning to think of the subsequent plans. Klein didn't pin his hopes on Sequence 8, Miss Justice to succeed. He nodded and said,
What compensation would you like?
The formula to the psychiatrist potion, as well as the corresponding Beyonder ingredients. Oh, we can wait until the mission is completed before discussing further. If it doesn't succeed, I'll bear the expenses. I still owe your blessed the bounty money.
Audrey said, before hesitantly adding,
Bounty money? So it was given to Miss Justice. 10,000 pounds. That's 5,000 if we split it equally.
Shrouded in the gray fog, Klein pondered for a few seconds on how much Ambassador Bakerland was worth, and finally decided that he was definitely more valuable than Vice Admiral Hurricane Quilangos.
Sure.
Klein replied in a normal tone. At this moment, the hanged man Alger added,
I'll also accept this mission. The compensation can be determined after the mission is completed.
Didn't you return to the sea?
Audrey asked in surprise.
Just because I'm not in Backland doesn't mean I can't kill Ambassador Bakerland.
Alger said with a smile, without giving any detailed explanations. Derek, who was beside him, never had the chance to join in on the conversation. Klein nodded in agreement.
Okay.
He immediately turned his gaze to the Roselle diary in his hands. Chapter 237, Sequence 2.
October 29th. The leader of the secret order, Zaratul, visited me once again. He didn't mention anything specific, and just casually chatted with me. I wasn't able to guess his true intentions. It seems like he just wanted to strengthen the communication between us and understand each other better. I've already met the two high-sequence Beyonders from the church, but I felt that Zaratul was much more powerful and mysterious than them, so I asked him what sequence number he was without much hope, and in the end he actually answered me. He told me that he was a Sequence 2, Miracle Invoker. Sequence 2, in the church's categorization, that's the position of an angel, close to that of a deity. He truly is more powerful than the alchemist and arcane scholar that I met before, but my intuition tells me that Zaratul isn't telling the whole truth. Sequence 2 might just be his former position, or that he's about to advance. Miracle Invoker? A master at creating miracles? The name of this potion makes one's imagination run wild. This is the corresponding Sequence 2 of Seer, a miracle invoker who controls fate. I tried probing Zaratul if the word miracle refers to the miracle of fate. That the seer pathway is one that slowly understands and grasps fate so as to control it? Anari. Zaratul ignored the first question. He told me that fate is just one of the parts of the seer pathway, and it's not even its main focus. The pathway that truly represents fate is monster. He raised a few examples, which were all potion names of the monster sequence. Sequence 7 Lucky, Sequence 5 Winner, Sequence 2 Soothsayer, and Sequence 1 Snake of Mercury. It's also known as the Snake of Fate. This was the first Sequence 1 I got to know. It hit me right in the face. According to what I know, the monster pathway should be controlled by the life school of thought. This school seems to also have parts of the apothecary sequence pathway. They propose 3 major divisions: the world of absolute rationality, the world of the spirit, and the material world. Yay, it's pretty cool. Zaratul told me that the life school of thought specializes in astromancy, seeking to use medicine, music, light, wine, and fragrance to eliminate paths with unfavorable star readings and fate. They believe that disasters and diseases are caused by the loss of balance between man and nature, as well as the balance between man and his own mind. He added meaningfully that the life school of thought worships the moon. Why worship the moon and not go one step further, the Evernight goddess?
This diary took up 2 pages and was clearly copied from both sides of the original.
That's a lot of information.
Klein sighed in heartfelt silence. This was also the first time he was learning of a Sequence 1 potion's name. Snake of Mercury and Snake of Fate really made one feel a pining for.
Similarly, it's my first time learning of a Sequence 2. I now know the corresponding Sequence 2 of Seer. The name Miracle Invoker sounds pretty good. It contains deep meaning and doesn't sound lowly. Of course, compared to Soothsayer, it does seem a little inferior. Fate is only part of the seer pathway, and it's not even its main focus. I have to remember this. I should constantly reflect on myself and not end up steering towards fate. It might result in the failure of my acting. Zaratul's words don't seem contradictory. The monster pathway is the real path of fate. So, Soothsayer is a sequence 2. If that's the case, then I already knew of a sequence 2 in the past.
Although he didn't take his eyes off the paper, Klein was seriously considering his own sequence chain. Due to his experience in digesting the 2 potions, Seer and Clown, and because he could spy and revere fate, he was able to be a little prescient regarding fate. However, he would still be helpless toward the development of fate. He had slowly been equating the essence of his Beyonder pathway to fate. If it wasn't for this diary, it was very likely that he would have used this as a premise to comprehend and act for the subsequent sequences. As for whether or not Zaratul was lying, what Klein was certain of was that the monster pathway was definitely the sequence of fate, which was consistent with what he had seen from the confidential information of the Nighthawks and with the potion name he had heard of earlier, Soothsayer. Now that there was a fate sequence, the seer pathway was unlikely to be a repeat. This would result in some degree of overlapping, and it would be inconsistent with how each of the current sequences had different characteristics. Therefore, Klein was inclined to believe what Zaratul had said. He was inclined to believe that fate was only part of the seer's pathway, not even its main focus.
The value of these 2 pages is invaluable to the present me. The Alchemist and the Arcane Scholar should be the higher sequences of the Savant pathway. From Roselle's tone, they definitely don't belong to sequence 2 and 1. That is to say, they are sequence 4 and sequence 3. For the time being, it's impossible to determine which is sequence 4 and which is sequence 3.
Klein gathered his thoughts, flipped the diary, and continued reading. As for why the life school of thought only worshipped the moon and didn't believe in the Evernight goddess, which symbolized the crimson moon, he was unable to ponder too deeply about it due to the lack of information. The 3rd page was Roselle's recount of inventing a practical steam engine. At times he was afraid of suffering crackdowns, and at other times afraid that the fruits of his labor would be seized by powerful figures. His words displayed his fear of being persecuted.
To think that even Emperor Roselle, who thought of himself as the protagonist of an era, would have such a perturbed and worried side to him.
The corners of Klein's mouth twitched as he flipped to the 4th page of the diary.
April 18th. Matilda is pregnant. It's to be expected, and I can even tell you exactly which love-making session she conceived in, because I felt a decrease in my Beyonder characteristic. Once the conception is successful, my own Beyonder characteristic will follow a mysterious connection, and part of it will be transferred to my child. After that, I asked Archbishop Fanesti worriedly. He told me that this is a normal phenomenon. For sequence 7 and below, Beyonder characteristics will not be passed on to the next generation, but it isn't absolute. Sequence 6 and 5 will naturally pass down a portion, but it will not affect the parent's strength. As for the child, they would be born with certain Beyonder powers, close to that of sequence 9, but as a result, their pathway is basically fixed. At high sequences, the inheritance of Beyonder characteristics is something one can control. One can choose to pass down or not, or one can even choose to pass down just a little bit, a third, half, or all of them. In other words, the children, born from high-sequence Beyonders, might be born as Beyonders. As for the sequence number, it's up to either one of the parents to decide. I wonder if the descendants of the deities are like this as well.
After reading the diary, there were only 2 phrases in Klein's mind: Law of Beyonder Characteristics Indestructibility and Law of Beyonder Characteristics Conservation.
Is the law governing the survival of Beyonder creatures? It's no wonder that some magical animals will reproduce only before they die. It's no wonder there would be the phenomenon of increased killing and bloodlust after childbirth. The target would be of their own race or even their partner. This is to supplement their Beyonder characteristics. According to this logic, if we trace this all the way back, where did the earliest Beyonder characteristics come from? Produced out of thin air? From the Creator who created everything?
Since Miss Justice had already advanced to telepathist, Klein controlled the urge to nod and continued to leaf through the pages. The 5th page was Rozelle's criticisms about how no one could enjoy his pop music and thought that he was making noise, while at the same time he mused how refreshing stories was a common pursuit of different people from different worlds, and that the popularity of the novels he plagiarized from the Count of Monte Cristo allowed the newspaper he founded to flourish.
Emperor, is there anything else you haven't done?
With a smile, Klein turned to the 6th and final page.
November 10th. I received the great pirate Savigny Solomon in secret at the White Maple Palace. I hope that he will plunder my opponents on the new sea route and strike at the ships of Faisac, Loen, and Fainapotter, and I promise to help him advance to a high sequence beyonder. The beyonder pathway of Black Emperor has names that are as strange as the demoness pathway: corruption, confusion, the fallen, disorder. However, in order to match the Black Emperor, they added on their own suffixes: Baron of Corruption, Mentor of Disorder, Earl of the Fallen, and Prince of Abolition. In order for Savigny to live up to his name, I decided to confer him the title of Earl of the Court in secret. Savigny has a child named Nast Solomon, and my intuition tells me that he will dominate the 5 seas in the future.
Nast Solomon. The king of the 5 seas, Nast? Nast, who claims to be a descendant of the Solomon Empire? To think that he was born during the Roselle period.
Klein was stunned. Since Roselle had mentioned the term new sea route, Klein had easily determined the corresponding year. It was in 1194 that the new sea route was discovered and the southern continent was found, and Roselle was assassinated in 1198. The diary could only have been written between those 2 years. That also meant that it was about 151 to 155 years ago.
If Nast, the king of the 5 seas, was the Nast Solomon Roselle had spoken of, he's almost 160 years old. Is this due to other reasons, or do high-sequence beyonders obtain an extension to their lifespan in the first place?
Klein thought seriously. He gathered his thoughts and let the diary disappear from his hands. He then looked at Justice and said,
"You are free to trade or communicate now."
Mr. Fool has no general knowledge to tell us today.
Audrey was slightly disappointed. She turned her gaze to Sun and said,
Can I exchange information related to the dragon from you?
She clearly remembered that Mr. Sun called the spectator pathway the dragon pathway, and that he said it originated from the dragon race.
Sure, I want the Sequence 8 potion formula for Bard,
answered the Sun, Derek, who had been silent all this while in hesitation. He had wanted to use this as an exchange for information on the world where Justice and the Hanged Man were living, so that he would not always be confounded by what he heard. However, seeing that his process of digesting the potion was nearing completion, he still made his advancement his top priority. Chapter 238, Dragon of Imagination. Audrey wasn't surprised by the Sun's request. Since the acting method had proliferated in the City of Silver, then the amount of time that had passed suggested that it was likely that he was close to the end of his digestion period. Seeking the subsequent potion formula was definitely one of his highest priorities. Audrey thought with great interest.
I wonder how the bard acts. Sing poetry every day? When encountering combat, dodge to the side and use his singing to bring courage and strength to his companions. Or perhaps he would first bless himself before charging forward with a hammer or sword raised. I wonder if it will bring about an improvement in his singing ability. If it's possible, then he would definitely be an outstanding singer or opera singer.
She purposely didn't express her stance in a hurry so as to not let the Sun raise the price again. This wasn't something she learned from her tutor or from the Beyonder gatherings she had attended. It was purely a technique she had developed herself after she had advanced to become a telepathist.
I will try my best to find the Sequence 8 potion formula corresponding to the Bard pathway, but it won't be today. Are you satisfied with this condition?
Audrey said in deliberation before looking at the seat of honor at the ancient table.
We can seek Mr. Fool's help to bear witness to this agreement.
At that moment, Klein laughed and replied,
"Miss Justice, Perhaps I can provide the light supplement formula for you.
Audrey's eyes lit up as she quickly nodded slightly.
No problem. Then, what should I use to exchange with you?
I haven't thought of it yet.
Klein chuckled and said,
Don't worry. Perhaps my blessed will require help in certain matters in the future.
His thoughts were very simple. If he allowed Miss Justice to obtain the formula of light supplement in her Beyonder circles, then wouldn't the knowledge he had stolen from the eternal blazing sun at the cost of near immolation be for naught? At the very least, it would be wasted at the Tarot Club.
All right, I will do my best to help them.
Audrey promised happily. Klein pressed his hands together and a yellowish-brown piece of goatskin parchment appeared before him. On it was the formula for the light supplement potion, including substitute ingredients and their ancient names. Furthermore, they were all translated to Jotun. Main ingredients: a piece of brilliance rock or powder of dazzling soul, blood of a mirror hedgehog or the heart of a magma titan. Supplementary ingredients: a golden-edged sunflower, 3 drops of aconite juice. With a gentle push, the goat skin appeared in front of the sun. Although he could pray to Mr. Fool to recall the formula even if he forgot it completely, Derek still diligently memorized the formula. It took him quite a while before he said,
Miss Justice, we can talk about the dragons.
Mr. Fool, I seek your permission to speak with Mr. Sun alone.
Audrey quickly raised her hand. She originally believed that the Sun would put the appropriate content on paper for her to read, but it would be inconvenient for her to ask questions. She would have to pen her questions and push them back to him. Such a way of communication was utterly cumbersome.
Speak with him alone? In such a conversation, you probably wouldn't understand what the sun is saying. Likewise, for the sun.
Klein nodded as his voice remained placid.
All right.
In the Beyonder circles, Hermes was a language one had to master. Ancient Hermes was something that one could learn and was relatively popular. Jotun, Dragonese, and Elvish were relatively less popular, so few people knew them. The moment that was said, Klein isolated the hanged man, preventing him from seeing or hearing. Algier had a certain interest in the knowledge of the dragons, but it wasn't enough for him to pay the price of listening, so he kept silent and waited. Seeing that Mr. Fool had made a gesture for them to start talking, the son, Derek, remained silent for a few seconds, organized his words, and said,
The dragons are mortal enemies of the giant king. They all look like magnified lizards, and their entire bodies are covered in scales of different colors. Their 4 limbs are thick and powerful, and their wings are wide enough to drive their giant bodies to flight. They are the rulers of the sky. They have a myriad of abilities. Some have the ability to breathe fire, others the ability to command lightning, bring corrosion, or even creating frost. But these are not mainstream among the dragons. The Mind Dragons occupies the greatest number of dragons, with Dragon King Ankewelt as their representative. The Beyonder pathway that stems from the Mind Dragon is the Spectator. In the City of Silver, we typically call it the Dragon Pathway.
With regards to similar trades, Derek had initially prepared to regurgitate the historical texts, but upon discovering that Miss Justice and Mr. Hanged Man didn't seem to share the same world, he gradually realized the value of the widely known history of the City of Silver. Thus, he only talked about dragons this time, and spoke nothing of giants, elves, mutants, phoenixes, vampires, etc.
The King of Dragons, Ankewelt. This aligns with the records of the church.
Audrey nodded slightly, politely refraining from interrupting the son's narration. Derek recalled the contents of his textbook and said,
Back then, the most powerful and most terrifying dragon was the Dragon King Ankewelt, also known as the Dragon of Imagination. Apart from it, his son, Alzahad, blanketed the sky as well, overlooking the famous, powerful figures across the land and sea. Its name was the Dragon of Nightmare. Regarding the Dragon of Imagination Ankewelt, there was a legend that whatever he imagined would manifest. The kingdom he imagined would definitely descend upon the material world. The future, it declares, would definitely play out and become reality.
This.
Klein suddenly frowned. If it wasn't for the fact that Justice Audrey was focused on listening to the sun, she definitely would have noticed his abnormality, even if he was covered by the thick gray fog. The description made him think of Sealed Artifact 008.
A declared future would definitely play out. They share similar characteristics.
Klein leaned back in his chair. He looked relaxed, but in fact, he was even more focused.
Dragon of imagination. How cool. That's the mark of a deity.
Audrey's eyes lit up when she heard him, filled with excitement and anticipation. Derek paused for a few seconds before continuing.
Its son, Dragon of Nightmare Alzuhud, is similarly terrifying. It can control the hearts of every living creature and make them act according to his will. And these living creatures will find it hard to sense it, believing that their actions were of their own will. It will also fabricate real nightmares into reality, causing many living creatures to unknowingly participate in them. It would then give them the cruelest and shocking ends. Legend has it that it especially loves mischief, that it will let a prince kiss a princess to wake her up, but the princess has already mostly rotten away. It will make ordinary girls wear dancing shoes and dance in front of the prince, but find themselves unable to stop dancing until their deaths. It will create all kinds of coincidences and push the fates of many living creatures towards tragedy.
All kinds of coincidences. This sounds even more like a 008. Of course, I don't know much about the sealed artifact.
Klein resisted the urge to stroke his chin as he made himself look like an immutable ancient well.
What a vile dragon. However, its abilities are very interesting.
Audrey said, half sighing, half excited.
Is this the future of the spectator pathway? No, I have to call it the dragon pathway. I don't want to switch to another sequence.
Audrey wished that she could immediately become a Sequence 7 psychiatrist and continue her rapid advancement. The son Derek answered sincerely.
It has been 2,000 to 3,000 years since the history of the dragon and the giant king. Everything I know comes from textbooks and legends, so there is no guarantee of its authenticity.
At least your history remains intact.
Audrey was in a good mood.
And then?
Then, the creator awoke, and the dragon of imagination, the dragon of nightmare, and other famous dragons fell from the sky, losing everything, including their lives. This resulted in a lack of sunlight for 49 days, causing countless volcanoes to erupt, as well as tides that drowned everything. And after the dragons declined, they could only hide away in various dangerous areas. Later on, the giant king was destroyed by the creator as well.
Derek said in a heavy tone.
This is different from the history I know. Wasn't it the Lord of Storms, eternal blazing sun, and the God of knowledge and wisdom who led humanity to defeat the dragons, giants, and kill their kings?
Audrey felt confused, as though time and history were somehow out of place. Klein was also puzzled by this and felt that the true history was riddled with mysteries, especially as it was from the Second Epoch, a time more ancient than history.
Most of the legends recorded in the church's ancient texts should be fake, but the history of the City of Silver cannot be completely believed. What would real history be like?
He gathered his thoughts, smiled, and asked,
Is the exchange over?
That's all I know.
Derek replied in shame. He felt that the information he had provided didn't match the value of the light suppliant potion formula. Audrey quietly drew a breath as the corners of her mouth curved upwards.
I'm very satisfied. Brr, I know my future direction.
She added happily in her mind. After a few more exchanges, Klein announced the end of this week's Tarot Club. After sending off Miss Justice and the others, he didn't linger any longer and quickly returned to his bedroom to reduce the risk of being discovered by others. In Empress Borough, the opulent villa of Earl Hall, Audrey happily paced back and forth, planning to reward Susie with a few dog treats. Just then, she heard a knock at the door. From the sound of her footsteps and the gate, she could tell that it was her personal maid, Annie. Audrey looked at the mirror, smoothed her hair, and straightened her back.
Come in.
Annie came in with a piece of paper and smiled.
Miss, a telegram for you. Came from the southern continent.
Southern continent? Alfred?
Audrey suddenly thought of her elder brother, took the paper in delight, and examined it closely. It was indeed from her second elder brother, Alfred Hall. He had sent a telegram from the east coast of the Balaam Empire, and it read, "I've found the rainbow salamander you wanted. 2 in total. Please await its delivery."
But I don't need it anymore.
Audrey froze, blinked, and turned her head sharply to Susie. The large golden retriever wagged her tail with a stupefied expression. Chapter 239, Each Having Their Own Gathering.
Well, I don't need it anymore, but I can give it to Susie, and I can exchange it for other Beyonder ingredients. Well, Susie's potion is still short of the spinal fluid from a Farsman rabbit. Some things are easier left to Susie. It's far more convenient for her than for me. Every famous detective needs a good assistant.
Audrey quickly made her decision. To her, this was no longer something she particularly cared about. As she put down the telegram, her pleasure subsided, and the worries of reality began to emerge.
I still owe Mr. Fool intelligence regarding the secret order, the mission to assassinate the Intis ambassador, and a request from His Blessed. I finally experienced the feeling of being riddled in debt. Audrey, we can't delay any longer. Let's start.
The girl quietly clenched her fists. She wanted to find a pen and paper and write a letter to Viscount Glaint so that he could arrange for her to meet Zio and Force as soon as possible. She needed to delegate the mission. She picked up a fountain pen, dipped it in ink, and suddenly Audrey held her wrist in midair without writing. She had just thought of a crucial problem, which was that she knew very little about the Intis ambassador Bakerland. In such cases, it was easy to misjudge the difficulty of a mission, either because no one was willing to accept it or because the mission had been entrusted to an unsuitable person, dooming the mission to fail at the very beginning. The resulting growing cost wasn't her main concern. Instead, she believed that the fool would better reward her and help her even further. After pondering for a moment, Audrey turned her head to her maidservant Annie and said,
Tell Countess Joria that I accept her invitation and will punctually attend her ball tomorrow evening.
Jaria was the wife of Earl Wolfe, and she had invited ambassadors to Lowen from every country to her upcoming ball, including Bakerland John Madan. Audrey had planned on declining the invitation with the excuse of being sick, but now she was interested in the ball. After she observed Ambassador Bakerland and gathered enough information, she would meet with Shio and Fors. Audrey suddenly felt the excitement of participating in a major event that she always dreamed of. First manor in the Rorstead Archipelago, City of Generosity, Byam. Having returned to the real world, Alger Wilson changed into attire that was considered gaudy in the Intis Republic and went through the back door of the hotel into the alley and made several detours. He stopped in front of a house with no garden or lawn and put on a familiar white mask. Next, he knocked on the door with 3 heavy knocks and 2 light ones, separating them with 2 lengthy pauses and 2 short pauses, respectively. After about 10 seconds, the door creaked open. A man wearing a pirate's headband stuck his head out and looked around quickly. The man said with a deep voice as he made way,
"Come in."
Without a word, Alger quietly walked into the room. Creak! The door slammed shut. At 15 Minsk Street, Klein drew the curtains open and sat down at his desk. The information about the secret order that was given to him by the hanged man made him realize that his target might have certain connections to the Intis Republic. At the same time, he was reminded of the words the hanged man had used to describe the Antigonus family, strange and terrifying.
The Beyonder who sneaked into my room last night to read the information and leave me a warning was indeed strange. The sequence pathway that the Antigonus family has in their control is the seer pathway which the secret order possesses. The two can be equated. That is to say, one can speculate that the Beyonder from last night was a member of the secret order who works part-time as an Intis Republic spy, or could the person not be a member of the secret order, but someone who used the connection between the Intis Republic and the secret order to obtain the corresponding formulas and potions.
Klein began to boldly assume that as he carefully tried to verify.
This can explain why my clown's premonition ability didn't trigger when the strange threadworm intruded. This is the suppression effect of a Beyonder from a higher sequence that shares the same pathway as me. Of course, it's also possible that the iron-black threadworm posed no concrete threat to me. Similarly, it can be explained why the threadworm infiltrated my room the same night that I wrote the information regarding Ian Wright. Furthermore, it went straight for the desk. The other party is equipped with seer abilities, making matters appear reasonably logical.
After repeatedly verifying his speculation, Klein felt that his guess was very likely close to the truth.
If the person in question is a relatively higher sequence beyonder from the seer pathway, what sequence number would he be? And what would the potion name be? To have the threadworm in his control, could it be another component of a circus, the beast tamer?
Klein shook his head in a self-deprecating manner while feeling amused.
Perhaps my subsequent potion formula will be obtained from him. Is this the true meaning of the revelation I received from my former divination? Backland really is the land of hope.
Klein muttered a few words to himself and began to consider what to do next. He had entrusted the task of assassinating the Intis ambassador Bakerland to put an end to all latent dangers. He had to avoid suspicion, but he didn't have the ability needed to do so. After Ian Wright's whereabouts were revealed to both sides, he was confident that Ambassador Bakerland wouldn't have time to exact revenge on him in the near future and wouldn't add to his problems. Finding the extremely important item he mentioned was obviously what he was most concerned about.
In other words, before that item is found, I will be safe. I won't need to rush to hire powerful Beyonder bodyguards. Even if there's any follow-up revenge, it's unlikely the ambassador will hire a high-sequence Beyonder to deal with me. It's neither economical nor necessary. After all, Backland isn't his home ground. The highest possibility is that he would still get the Beyonder who sent the iron-black threadworm to infiltrate my room last night. He would at least be at sequence 7 and perhaps even sequence 6 or 5. He has the strength required and is familiar with the situation. When the time comes, I just need to hire a bodyguard according to this standard. I hope that before then, the ambassador will never be able to issue such an order.
Klein looked out of the window at the fog which had finally dissipated, seemingly in a daze. He decided to continue heading to Braveheart's bar tonight. Firstly, this was to come into contact with other Beyonders through Caspars so as to choose a suitable bodyguard. Secondly, he could find an opportunity to sell Merceau's Beyonder characteristic, gather some funds, and see if anyone was selling any powerful mystic items to enhance his strength. This was a plan that would never go out of date. After confirming his plan, Klein pretended to leisurely read the newspaper. He waited until the sky turned dark before slowly getting up and making himself tomato oxtail soup. After eating and drinking to his heart's content, he drew the bedroom curtains as usual and decided not to open them tonight. Then, summoning himself and responding to himself, he turned into the unique spirit body, bringing back Azik's copper whistle, Merceau's Beyonder characteristic, the self-made charms, all sorts of materials, and the tarot cards to the real world, leaving behind only a few items, such as the bloodied contract. After doing all of this and equipping the corresponding items, Klein's strength returned to its peak, and he was once again half an expert in mysticism. He straightened his collar, took his hat and cane, and left 15 Minsk Street, Iron Gate Street, inside Braveheart's bar. In exchange for a glass of beer, Klein found Caspars in a card room, playing Fighting Evil while betting on a boxer outside. He was leading quite a pleasant life. The familiar surroundings reminded Klein of the last time he had met Merrick playing poker with more than 10 zombies. He was suddenly glad that he hadn't brought Azik's copper whistle with him.
If I carried the copper whistle that Mr. Azik had given me, I think that a dozen or so of Merrick's zombies would mutiny on the spot and come to entertain me warmly. I wonder what kind of expression he would have.
Klein stood by the door, nodding at Kaspar's Kalinin to indicate his intentions. Kaspars covered his cards and swore. He got up, walked to the door, and said in a low voice,
I'll take you to a place where the people, although they aren't as good as Merrick, are pretty strong. As for whether or not you can make a deal, it has nothing to do with me. However, I have to warn you in advance, you are not to anger them, or you might not be able to see the sun tomorrow. Of course, it's not easy to see the sun in Backland after September.
Klein asked sincerely.
Do I need to pay you?
Kaspers nodded, pleased.
£2?
I can buy a revolver with that money at a weapons store. Although they set the price at more than £3, it can basically be haggled for around £2.
Klein grumbled and gave Kaspars 2 one-pound notes. Kaspars turned his head to his fellow players to inform them that he was leaving. Hobbling along, he led Klein towards the bar's kitchen and from there entered the back alley and circled around a darkened house. He took out an iron mask that could only cover half a face, handed it to Klein, and chuckled.
Just pretend that you bought this for £2.
I can buy a lot more with £2.
Klein wore the iron mask and deliberately messed up his hair. Seeing that he was ready, Kaspars knocked on the door rhythmically. 7 or 8 seconds later, a small wooden board on the door was suddenly pulled open, revealing a pair of brown eyes behind it. After a long moment of scrutiny, Klein finally saw the door open behind him. A man wearing an iron mask stood there and handed Klein a hooded robe. He said to Kaspars in a hoarse voice,
Next time, remember to tell me in advance. Otherwise, HMPH.
He closed the door, turned, and led Klein through the darkened living room into the activity room on the first floor. There was a candle burning on the coffee table, and the room was dimly lit. There were about 10 people sitting on the sofas and chairs around the coffee table. They were all wearing hooded robes and wearing iron masks. After putting on the long robe, Klein quietly found a chair in a corner and sat down. He heard a fat-faced man complain,
Recently, there has been a group of wild beasts in the sewers that have gnawed away a lot of the herbs I grew. They're very smart and didn't even touch the poisonous ones. I need someone to help me clean them up. You know, this isn't my specialty. I'm only good at concocting medicine and treating your illnesses.
Chapter 240. Trying your luck?
Good at concocting medicine, treating illnesses, and growing quite a few medicinal herbs in the sewers. Is he an apothecary? I wonder if he's a member of the Life School of Thought, or a believer of Earth Mother. Of course, it's more likely for him to be unaffiliated.
Klein listened thoughtfully, but didn't speak out carelessly. In the Lowen Kingdom, due to the Church of Storms rejecting the eternal blazing sun and the God of knowledge and wisdom, while the Church of Evernight and the Church of the God of Combat were irreconcilable. As a result of this, among the foreign religions, only the Church of Earth Mother had obtained the right to preach, but under the tacit suppression from the 3 churches. They only had a few churches with very few believers, to the point that they didn't even need to form a team of Beyonders. And even if they did, they wouldn't be recognized by the government and couldn't cooperate with the police department. They would be considered as vigilantes. According to the confidential information of the Nighthawks, the Church of Earth Mother had 2 sequence paths in its control, planter and apothecary. However, the latter was apparently incomplete. The suspected apothecary didn't have his hood on. He revealed a black iron mask on his face, but it only covered the part above the bridge of his nose, making the quivering fat on his cheeks appear to stand out.
I repeat, I need someone to clean up the newly appeared beast in the sewers. I only need the area around Backland Bridge cleaned up. Payment will be with 4 bottles of my precious medicine. 2 of them can effectively stop bleeding and stimulate the healing of wounds. Trust me, this is better than going to the clinic to do a suture operation. And it's effective for 6 months.
The man suspected to be an apothecary stated his requirements and corresponding conditions. He suddenly let out a soft laugh and continued to describe the case.
The other 2 bottles can last 1.5 months and can allow a man to find the urges from back when he was 17 or 18 years old and become a Beyonder on the bed. You know what I mean. Even if it exceeds the use-by date, it can still produce effects, but it will also spread throughout the body. The user will become abnormally violent, and their strength, speed, and agility will greatly increase before exhaustion kicks in half an hour later.
Why does he look like those old military doctors who plaster their tiny advertisements everywhere, and shamelessly promoting the effects of his expired drugs?
Klein couldn't help but silently lampoon. Seeing the silent room after he said his piece, the suspected apothecary could only grit his teeth and say,
I'll add 30 pounds on top of my 4 precious bottles of medicine.
Finally, a man sitting somewhere along the periphery of the couches spoke up. He surveyed the area and said in a deep voice,
I accept this commission. You should pay in advance with 2 bottles of medicine, one of each kind. Mr. Eye of Wisdom will bear witness.
No problem,
said an elder seated on a single sofa with a nod. The lines on his cheeks were deep, his skin a little shriveled, and his voice had an ancient quality to it, so Klein judged him to be an elderly gentleman.
All right.
The suspected apothecary heaved a sigh of relief. After the conclusion of this transaction, the gathering seemed to turn more lively. Soon, a woman with her face completely covered by a hood said,
I want to sell 2 weapons.
Weapons?
Klein adjusted his posture and became more focused. Since he was temporarily unable to advance, he could only increase his strength by using external items.
One of them is an inscribed steel sword. It was smithed by the Church of the Eternal Blazing Sun. It comes with purifying and evil warding effects. It's the nemesis of water ghosts, wraiths, zombies, and other undead creatures. It can still be used for another 3 years. Of course, its sharpness is enough to kill.
The woman's voice fluctuated in volume, a clear attempt to hide her characteristics.
500 pounds, or the Sequence 8 potion, Barbarian, and it will be yours.
How expensive? For me, there's no reason I must have it. If I were to encounter an undead that I'm currently unable to deal with, blowing the whistle is the best solution. Even without Mr. Isaac, the messenger alone should be able to intimidate many undead creatures.
Klein shook his head and listened to the lady's introduction of the second weapon.
Meat cleaver. With exquisite mechanical structure, it can be transformed, making it easy to carry. This is a combat weapon made by an outstanding craftsman. It's rarely seen and will cost 25 pounds.
There sure is a huge difference in pricing between weapons with Beyonder effects and those without.
Klein watched from the sidelines until the steel sword was bought by a sullen gentleman in another corner, and the meat cleaver became part of Mr. Eye of Wisdom's collection. There were successes and failures in the few deals that followed. The only thing that tempted Klein was a fortune accessory, a Beyonder item that could make a person's luck with fortune rise for 3 months. However, this wasn't his main goal, and the price wasn't that great. Seeing that the atmosphere had turned silent once again, he slowly exhaled and said in a suppressed voice,
I want to sell something.
After attracting everyone's attention, he took out an iron cigar case and pushed out the Crimson Beyonder characteristic, which resembled jelly. Without needing to organizing his words, he introduced it with something he had already prepared ahead of time.
This is something I obtained from a corpse. I'm not sure what use it has, it's just that I find it very magical. Maybe some of you know what this is?
Klein deliberately didn't mention that this was a Beyonder characteristic, nor did he mention that the crimson jelly in his hand could replace the main ingredient of the Hunter potion. This involved the law of Beyonder characteristics' indestructibility, and he didn't want to benefit the members of this Beyonder gathering with this knowledge. In addition to this, Klein had the intention of probing to see if anyone there knew the law of Beyonder characteristics' indestructibility. Such a person would definitely be stronger than the rest, or perhaps someone with a powerful background, making them suitable as a bodyguard. At the same time, he continued to disguise himself as an ordinary person who didn't know much about the Beyonder community. Although the members of the gathering couldn't see his appearance through the iron mask, Kaspars Kalinin knew what he looked like, and quite a few people in the room probably knew Kaspars. Being careful and prudent were the 2 things Klein had emphasized to himself before leaving home today. Gazes examined the crimson object in his hand, but Klein wasn't a spectator and couldn't tell what they meant. After more than 10 seconds, no one spoke. The room was as quiet as a cemetery. At this moment, the old gentleman sitting on the sofa, Mr. Eye of Wisdom, coughed and said,
I have a rough idea of what it is and what it does, but knowledge needs to be exchanged with something in return. I'll pay 400 pounds. Believe me, it's a perfectly fair price. Of course, you have the right to refuse.
The main ingredients of Sequence 9 potions are about 150 to 200 pounds. 2 are needed, and they add up to about 400 pounds. The offer is very reasonable. This old gentleman with the codename Eye of Wisdom seems to recognize that this belongs to the hunter sequence. He had no need for divination, and he was able to recognize it immediately. Could it be the sequence 7 of the Sequencer's Pathway appraiser?
Klein thought for a moment and said,
Deal. However, sir, you don't need to rush to pay. I still have another request.
What request?
Klein pondered and said,
The thing is, I offended someone. According to your circle, he should be sequence 6, or maybe 5. I wish to hire a bodyguard.
Sequence 6? Maybe sequence 5? Why don't you just die quietly? If we reach that level, why would we be attending such a small gathering?
The suspected apothecary blurted out with a bit of a sneer in his astonishment. Although the other members of the party didn't say anything, from the looks of it, no one planned on accepting the request. Their thoughts were similar to those of the suspected apothecary. Eye of Wisdom chuckled and said,
Maybe you don't know our circle well enough. People at sequence 6 or sequence 5 are very, very powerful and terrifying people. Yes, there have been many cases of a lot of sequence 8 and sequence 9 beyonders killing someone that strong, but those are events that are still very hard to replicate. I think no one here is willing to take such a huge risk to protect you. If you're certain that the other party is only sequence 6 and doesn't have any mystical items, there might be someone who will want to accept the challenge this mission entails.
Well, I'm not sure.
Klein shrugged and said,
Then I'll have to try to save myself. What can I get for 400 pounds? The mystical item you were talking about?
Eye of Wisdom said sincerely,
Believe me, a mystical item worth 400 pounds certainly won't be able to deal with your enemy, and it will even bring you more danger. I suggest that you apologize to him. Sincerely apologize, and perhaps 400 pounds will be enough to buy his understanding.
Frankly, I've thought about it, but I don't think they'll accept it.
Klein was about to answer when the man who had accepted the task of cleaning the sewer beast suddenly laughed.
Maybe. You can try your luck. I have a mystical item here that I can sell you for 400 pounds. It can let you hear the voice of a great being. If you're lucky and can decipher some useful information, you'll become very powerful, and it will no longer be difficult for you to protect yourself. Well, if you're unlucky and end up deciphering a curse, or fail to decipher it, then you'll be hurt or even end up dying. Do you want to take the gamble?
Before he could finish his sentence, Eye of Wisdom growled,
Blacksnake, don't mention that ominous item of yours.
Blacksnake laughed and said,
I'm not lying. I'm not violating the rules here either. I told him about the advantages and disadvantages and left him to make his own choice. The probability of getting useful information is approximately 10%. Do you want to take the gamble?
The Russian roulette of the Beyonder world. Hearing the voice of a great being. Is this the Aurora Order's listener? An item left behind after a listener lost control?
Klein looked at Blacksnake, that he suspected to be a member of the Aurora Order, and made many connections.
Perhaps I can bet on it? No, I can't call it a bet, because I'll bring this item to the world above the gray fog before using it. I can already bring real objects there. This way, I can avoid most of the danger. However, this is only an item left behind by a sequence 8 beyonder. The corresponding benefit might not be that good. 400 pounds isn't cheap.
As his thoughts raced through his mind, Klein nodded solemnly and said,
Deal.